Hello and a very warm welcome from the British Council on Arts and Culture Resource India for the web session for festivals in partnership with the Events and Entertainment Output Association, EEMA, in India. For those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan, the Director Arts India at the British Council, and today marks the second season of our interactive Festival Connections digital editions, and we'll be focusing on a roadmap to recovery with speakers from across India. For this web season series, as part of the monthly program Festival Connections, it's aimed for skills and capacity development to strengthen the creative economy of arts and culture festivals. And today we'll be reviewing the EEMA Safe Operating Practices Guidelines as we look to the future and safe ways of working for festival managers, technicians, staff, volunteers, artists, and audiences. We've got a fabulous set of speakers. All of our facilitators are members of EEMA, and speakers from festivals represent visual arts, performing arts, and literature, based in Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, and Hyderabad. You may have seen the recent FICCI, Artex, and British Council taking the temperature reports, which looks at the impact of COVID-19 on the creative economy in India, which confirmed that 88% of respondents feared the long-term impact of social distancing on their ability to produce and reopen. So this session's focus on health and safety and social distancing is indeed timely as we look to the future. So far, we've had nearly 800 arts organizations and artists from across the creative industries complete the survey since it's first launched in spring this year. And we'll be launching the second Taking the Temperature report over the coming weeks. Our Festivals Academy, which until COVID-19 was run in Goa and Guwahati face-to-face, from January next year, will be a residency which will go online with trainers in the UK and India. And the course will be accredited by a UK university. So watch the British Council website for more updates on that over the coming weeks. During COVID-19, we know this is a really uncertain time for festivals in India and the UK. Nevertheless, we firmly believe that culture connects us, and creativity and the collaboration that binds us together now is more important than ever. So with all that said, I'm pleased to hand over once again to a co-host for the afternoon, Rashmi Dhanwani, founder director of the Artex Company, to take the session forward with our guest speakers. Rashmi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure once again to be doing this with you and British Council. Welcome again, everyone. As you know, at Festival Connections, our core focus for the last 6 odd months, primarily since the pandemic has hit, has been to empower festivals of India through community discussions, best practice sharing, and confronting some of the challenges that we're dealing with head on. This time, we've partnered with EEMA to amplify its wonderful work in supporting the event sector to recover. But at the same time, we're doing that keeping in mind the peculiarities of the festival sector, which is the fact that we operate using dynamics of very, very different genres. So keeping that in mind, what we've done today is we're opening up the session on SOPs with festival directors and teams from visual arts, performing arts, and literary arts. They will be discussing and exploring the SOPs that EEMA has shared in 2 ways. One, we'll be looking at the nuances of these SOPs. And second, we'll be looking at the implementation challenges. There'll be 2 sessions that will be run concurrently for about 30 odd minutes. The first session will focus on visual and literary arts, and the second session will be focusing on performing arts. Each of these sessions will be shared by a key team member from EEMA. I hope you've had a chance to look at the SOPs. If not, we'll share it in a chat box and a YouTube page as well. Please do share your thoughts with us at a later point. But for now, we had also shared the SOPs within our network. We've got some insights from it. And some of these insights and feedback have been interwoven into the session. If we can just see those insights right now on the screen. Sorry, before we dive into that, a little bit about who our audiences are today and where they are coming from. As you can see, a huge majority is actually had more than 16 years of experience in the festival sector. And again, a huge majority is about early career professionals, 0 to 5 years. About 36% is 0 to 5 years, and about 29% would be 16 plus years. We had also asked you, when are you planning your next event? A big chunk after taking a 6-month lockdown, perhaps a little bit of reflection on how do we proceed next. A huge number of you who've signed in today are looking at doing your event in the next 6 months. We also asked you, where do you locate yourself in terms of the kind of work that you've been doing? We've had cultural festival organizers as some of the highest group of people who are attending today. Then we've got artists and performers, public event organizers, venue and event spaces, and people who run corporate events. And finally, okay. So this is what we have in terms of just giving you a sense of where you are coming from. Some of the insights from the SOPs that we mentioned to you that we'd asked you to comment on, which will be interwoven into the session. Finally, what is it that you can expect from today's session as an outcome? One, we're hoping to have a succinct document emerge out of this, which we could share with EEMA, and they'll be able to take some of these insights back and see how to incorporate this into the next layer of working around the SOPs. As we know, the dynamics of the virus keeps evolving, and that means that we have to keep really looking at what these guidelines mean to us. And second, and more importantly, is for you, the festival sector, to have a platform to make your voices heard and your concerns listened to ensure that more of you are able to access this session. We have 2 sign language interpreters. And for that, let's say hello to our interpreters from Access for All. There are 2 of them. And then we've got also language interpretation. It's not a simultaneous translation, it's an interpretation. So we've got 2 language translators or other interpreters from Hindi. Bharat and Anil will be translating this in Hindi, and Shakti will be translating this in Tamil, interpreting this in Tamil. If you are on the Zoom link at the moment, on your right, and this was already there on the screen, you will see a function called interpretation. If you click on it, you can select the language that you want to listen in the session with. So that's our attempt to make this more accessible for all of you. So with that, let me first welcome Siddharth Chaturvedi, the General Secretary of EEMA and the CEO of Event Crafter. He's going to be presenting about EEMA's input and learnings from the live event trials that they've been doing since the SOPs have been released early in September. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for organizing this one. And it's a very important session, and I'm so glad you guys have picked on it. And we're so glad we partnered at EEMA. And so I will, what I'll do is, first up, I will do a quick overview of the document which you guys have gone through. I will just share my screen, and one sec. I hope you guys can all see it. All right. So, we are a fresh team at EEMA, by the way. We are a new team. It's called National Executive Committee at our association. We got in. We won the elections and got into doing the job at around second week of July. And on the first week of July, first NEC meeting at 20th July is when we actually formed a COVID task force amidst us, because we were very sure that we need a particular document which we need to engage the government with. Which we understand that this sector is one of the most affected and will be the last. It has been one of the last one which has opened up. So a solid document was needed for us to really engage with the government and pursue them to open the sector. So we made a task force comprising of around 15 subject matter experts from various kind and various streams of work they come up with. They represent. So to tell you a fact that there was. I mean, in that room when we were sitting, and of course it was a Zoom room when we were sitting, the collective experience of that group was around 300 years. So you can be assured that there's a whole lot of experience which has got onto doing this document. I will straight away come to the details of it. How we actually defined this document is we've actually approached all the SOPs into 4 parts. First is the pre-planning, when the event is on the planning stage. Second is the pre-event communication to all the stakeholders, and on the setup when things are on the production and when the things are happening on ground. The third is practices conducted while you conduct the event, while you execute the event, when you do the event. And the fourth is the post-event. So these SOPs are basically divided into these 4 parts. We made SOPs for 8 various streams. I'll come to that a little later. But more or less, these are the 4 parts which we divided it in. Now, very important part which we want all organizers to really focus on going forward, and especially during these COVID times, is we all think about innovation. We all think about we all think about creativity. But we, in India, there's a huge lack of thinking about risks, thinking about safety. That comes to forefront in this particular that needs to come forefront when we go out and work in these times, for sure. So we say that each organizer and event agency has to be, they should do the risk assessment of what they're getting into. If you're planning your festival, you need to know what all risks are involved very, very categorically. And then you need to know how to mitigate those risks. So that's first. Secondly, what we're asking everyone now is, through this document, that please have a committee formed especially for this. A complete CRMACC committee is what we're calling it, the COVID Risk Mitigation Audit Compliance Committee. This needs to have the event planner, if you're the one, or someone from your team, a venue representative who represents the venue there, a host if it's a client also gets involved, and there should be a third-party safety officer which you should try and hire for your events, because that person can really audit that are you and your team really taking care of all the SOPs, or all kind of safety norms are taken care of. So this is a very, very important point I want to really emphasize on going forward, that we should definitely have it in mind. Venue selection has to be, of course, we need to look at sizes and numbers. We need to review that. Of course, we are looking at what we have proposed to the government is if we can allow, a number as far as 4 square meter per person. So that at least should be there when you select the venue. There are still containment zone, of course. Still working. We've gone past through the green, red, and yellow thing, but there are containment and non-containment zone. So your venue should not fall into containment zone for sure. Coming into next phase is engaging with your partners and engaging with the vendors who will work with you. You need to have a declaration form signed by all vendors, staff, and the crew which you have working of they being fit for the event. And in fact, there should be a self-declaration that they are completely okay and they don't have any symptoms whatsoever. While vendor come and work in a particular event, they should definitely wear mask, shield, gloves, or PPE kit. We understand that at times PPE kits is not a handy solution when you work in outdoors in a country like India, but definitely mask, shield, and gloves should definitely be there. There needs to be thermal screening done for them also before they are permitted to enter a premise. We are also, highly recommending that there are insurance companies out there who are insuring manpower, there are third-party insurers who are covering COVID events also. Please have your people and also your third-party, all your vendors, employees also should be covered for COVID safety. Now, we're actually starting from where things get picked up, which is our vendors go down. So we're suggesting that the venues, the vendors' vehicle, which basically transit all the goods, should be very well sanitized. And then the goods and material should be put on the vehicle, and goods and material again should be sanitized before being put on the vehicle. The workers should be encouraged to wash their hands every 90 minutes. There should be a log kept. No chewing of tobacco and smoking should be completely prohibited. There needs to be, like I earlier mentioned, that there needs to be equipment cleaning. There needs to be sanitization of equipment before they start from the go down, and even before they start doing the production at the venue. And the banquet and the venue or the open ground which you are doing your event in, there needs to be a proper markings or seatings done wherein you ensure physical distancing of 6 feet for sure. So that needs to be pre-planned and needs to be predefined at the venue. If there are furnitures, if there are any kind of things in the venue, there needs to be, if you're doing it in a hotel, that needs to be sanitized properly. We are really recommending all events should happen with pre-registration as much as possible. That allows you to have what size are coming in, and you kind of pre-arrange things according to that in the venue. Very important part going forward in doing events would be the proper guest education, and in fact in this document which has come out, we are talking about a specific term called guest social responsibility, because it's a responsibility of guests also who are coming into the event. They need to also behave responsibly according to the times. So there needs to be a proper reminder done on this aspect through there could be reminder communications which can start right before even they come to the venue through electronic mailers or through a physical a pamphlet kind of printed on the measures which needs to be taken care of if you're attending that event. The MC, the master of ceremony present in the event should time and again do regular announcements. There should be proper signages kept across the venue on reminding people of how to conduct themselves in that event area. We are definitely Arogya Setu app is helpful, and we are definitely and government is asking us to is mandating us to have people having our Arogya Setu app, and they should be safe in that Arogya Setu app to come in. For people, like I said before, they should be physically distant to each other. So arrangements should be done accordingly, that they are distant from one another. If you're doing a festival, you need to find out ways. That's what your mitigation committee actually does it. So that's why this whole committee is made, because every event might be unique to one another. I mean, though of course we're bringing out these SOPs, there are these guidelines, but these are broad framework. You need to really define your own SOP of the event, because every case might be a unique case. Every event venue would be a unique event, and accordingly you plan your things. But again, you need to think about how to make sure that people are physically distant to one another. Of course, people have to have their face covered. They need to be wearing masks. That's a mandate. There needs to be a thermal screening done at the entry for everyone. Anyone who's found symptomatic or running with a high temperature should not be allowed to come in. There needs to be entrance sanitization, like I mentioned. Also, we need to correct the data properly of whoever is coming in, so that we can keep the data with us for good 30 odd days. So if there's a breakout, or if there's some kind of thing which we find, the government finds that there are people who got infected, there could be a chain which can be followed. Depending on the event, we are asking if it's possible, if it's smaller number of people, you can have UV sanitization boxes also, or metal objects can be sanitized. We're asking people the committee should actually identify the regular high touch points where people put their hands. It could be a door, a knob, it could be, these various places, touch points needs to be defined and needs to be regularly sanitized during the event is happening. Also, there needs to be an isolation room planned beforehand when you're doing this event. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, Siddharth.
Okay. Sorry. So there needs to be, one sec, just I kind of skipped. Yeah, so I was talking about the isolation protocol. It is very important that there needs to be an isolation room planned, which should be a little distant away from the main event area, but there should be an isolation room, and there needs to be someone who understands the isolation protocol when you find that someone is symptomatic and needs to be taken to the isolation room, and then that person needs to know the protocols of how to make sure that that person remains in isolation, and subsequently the health workers are called and going and so those protocols needs to be very clear. Food and beverages needs to be also planned properly. It again depends where are you doing this event. Hotels, they have their own way of they made their own SOPs of F&B. If it's a festival happening in outdoors, you need to really plan. You need to really know who all your vendors are who are doing F&B there. There needs to be an SOP shared with them specifically for how to how to manage the food and beverage services, and also how to serve. If it's an open festival format, you need to have multiple counters. There needs to be a restriction in numbers of how many people can come at a time. That needs to be very clearly defined. And if it's a sit-down dinner, if it's a 6 feet dia table, not more than 4 people should be sitting there. So this document actually covers various kind of scenarios of eating also, and talks about it. As I had mentioned earlier, there should be a cleaning log, which the mitigation committee should make, and it should be checked every 30 minutes that the high touch points are cleaned again and sanitized again. And similarly, it should be a departure practice. In fact, people talk about the entry practice. We are also saying the departure practice should be also similar. They should again screen the guest before leaving, so that they understand that the organizer have that data also of they went out safely. It's important to also do the dismantling when you were not all kind of vendors, staff should be there together in the area and at one time. It should be done in shifts. So even both production and dismantling should happen in shifts. So should be the post-venue sanitization after dismantling gets over. You should have a proper plan of disposing of the unused food. And the waste management is again another critical part, that all the masks and gloves left in the venue should be treated as a hazardous waste material and should be taken up. And departure practice for the workers should also be followed similarly. And the post-event sanitization again, should be done once everything, all kind of dismantling is over. So this document, which which is out there from EEMA, covers 8 various streams, as you see it on the screen. It covers government and large-scale public and political events, corporate events, both done in an outdoor and an indoor format, weddings and social events, corporate activations. We've divided into 2 parts, which is this one is urban corporate activation, which basically happens in various touch points like RWAs, schools when they open, malls, so all kind of urban touch points. Large conferences, when there are bigger large conferences happening, which are big B2B large conferences. Rural marketing, there are SOPs being made for rural marketing, which basically talks about going out there in rural areas and conducting a kind of event or a promotion in various gram panchayats or various rural touch points. There are SOPs for religious events also, which we proposed, which talks about various kinds of religious events and functions. And then there is a SOP also proposed for music festivals and concerts, which primarily I think is the focus area today. So we've done these 8 odd categories. There's a 9th category also which we are working on, which is related to sports. Sporting events. So we're most likely about to launch the distant running SOPs very soon too, which will add up and make it 9 together. So this is more or less the overview which I thought I should share with you. Also, talking about, after doing, we actually launched these SOPs on 20th August through a webinar. That webinar was witnessed by around 80,000 people from the industry who actually saw that, and there are people have downloaded across the country this particular document, and actually it's kind of it's a very, the kind of feedback that you're getting is a very handy document to have. And it's a big support thing to have because the government guidelines are very limited guidelines. They don't understand the way we understand our business, which happens right from the drawing board to how to handle the vendors and how the vendors should be working at your place. The government guidelines will always be around people coming in. They would not be around what happens behind the scenes. So we've covered that majorly in this document, which becomes a very hallmark of this document. On the 21st September, when the government opened up the sector with 100 ceiling, we marked this occasion and we did a simulation event in 4 towns, Gurgaon. We did it in Gurgaon, Kochi, Goa, and Chandigarh, wherein we conducted, we gave a live demonstration of these SOPs. We had 100 people coming and attending the event in morning and in evening. So we had 200 people cumulatively on a given day in these 4 locations. We gave a live demonstration of the SOPs, and I'm very happy to inform you that we in fact traced everyone post doing the event, and there had been no single case which was found. So we actually gave a proof of concept also of these SOPs, that these are, when you do an event using these SOPs, it's a safe way of doing it. So that's from me, Rashmi.
Thanks so much, Siddharth. I hope you'll be able to jump in as we go through our other sessions to sort of bring in some of those learnings as well. So with that, we'd like to open up the session to our speakers. I'd like to welcome Swati and Venkatesh from the Bookaroo Children's Festival. If you could turn your videos on. And Mr. T. Vijay Kumar from the Hyderabad Literature Festival. This session would be chaired by Suman Jayakrishnan, who's the director of SJ Designs Private Limited, and with inputs from Siddharth whenever he can come in. Over to you all.
Good afternoon, actually, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rashmi. It's a pleasure to be here. It was a larger session, but I'm quite pleased that it's come down to the literature aspect of things, and I'll fill in on some of the others. It's suitable since I am an avid reader, so have attended many literature festivals. And I think I'm grateful for the fact it all started by reading very young. So you have a range that is covered by both the Bookaroo Festival, which is Swati and Venkatesh, and also Mr. Vijay Kumar, of course. Mr. Vijay Kumar, could I ask you to start with an introduction to the festival, anything that you think is of importance, and then we can move on after that.
Sure. Thank you, Sumant. Since I have 5 minutes, I just thought I would spend a half a minute to talk about or introduce our festival. The Hyderabad Literary Festival is an annual event. We are into the 11th year of this event. And every year we hold this festival in the last week, actually the last weekend of January. And about 150 and more speakers participate each year. And the motto, the tagline, or whatever you want to call it, of our festival is celebrating creativity. And the three major areas that we focus on are literature, art, and culture. So ours is not a literary event, but we interpret the term literature very broadly. So a film is a text for us, a play is a text for us, and so on. So that's how the festival evolved over the last 10 years. And we have certain, for example, inclusivity, environment, gender, women's issues, endangered languages. These are some of the areas that we give special attention to. And every year we have one foreign country as a guest nation. And so we invite a foreign country to showcase their art, literature, culture, etc. And at the same time, we also have one Indian language in special focus at every year. So this is as far as HLF is concerned. We had our 10th edition in January 2020, and 2021, like everybody, we have no idea whether we'll be able to do it or not, and I'll come to that in a minute. But meanwhile, when the lockdown was announced, there was a huge demand from our audiences to conduct online sessions. So we started online sessions in June, late June, early July, and we are conducting these online sessions once in 15 days, every alternate Fridays from 7 to 8 p.m. And it's still a new medium going online, and we are learning from each episode. One of the things that we found or discovered in a way is that it's much easy to get speakers online than when we were doing it physically. And also, but in terms of numbers, we are nowhere near, particularly these days when everybody is experiencing a kind of a Zoom fatigue. The audience numbers are nowhere near our regular sessions. We used to get about 15 to 18,000 footfall in our event, physical event, and now we get about maybe close to 200 to 230 audiences for every session. But what is interesting is that many people are coming back to the videos after the session is over. Just to give you one example, we had a session with Perumal Murugan, and we had about 210 people who were watching it live, but within 4 days, the number went up to 750 people have watched that video after the event, after the event was over. So the online sessions are what we have been conducting. And let me quickly come to our response to SOPs. I think it's a great initiative, and it's a very impressive document, very detailed and very helpful as a handbook. And so I think everybody knows the positives of that document, but from our point of view, we find let me say that we were in two minds whether we should continue to do our physical festival or whether we should do a virtual festival. And I think this document, the EEMA's SOP document, I think clinched the matter. We have decided not to do a physical event, and we have decided to do only an online event. So in a way, since we have already decided to do an online event to talk about the SOPs, which are actually targeting the physical events, may be a little disingenuous, but at the same time, having gone through the SOPs, let me say that we found that it's a little difficult to implement. I mean, these are all wonderful guidelines, but I felt that these are very difficult to implement. I mean, on a lighter note, we thought when we had a discussion internally, we thought that if we go by the guidelines of venue selection, for example, the only venue where we can do a festival of our size would be something, some kind of a multi-speciality, super speciality hospital, because that seems to be the only venue that kind of conforms to all the guidelines of the document. But on a serious note, I felt that roughly we made a calculation that it would increase in terms of planning time. It would increase it by nearly 50% because you need to think of many new things. So the time that is required would go up by nearly 50%. And we also felt that nearly 30% increase would result if we were to implement all these guidelines in terms of personnel, both man and woman power. There would be about 30% increase in that. And in terms of cost, I think it can go up anything between 40 to 50%. So cost escalation, a larger number of people required. These are some of the challenges in order to implement these. And lastly, so what we decided is that even if we are not doing a physical event, and if we are doing it only online, completely online, maybe a kind of a blended system where we will have some live sessions, but some pre-recorded sessions. That is something we are still discussing. But even in the new medium, or how do we exploit the new medium, the online medium, to send across some of the very important messages that are there in this document. For example, signages, or in terms of, can we, even in an online platform, can we use this medium to send across some of these very important messages of keeping oneself safe and keeping oneself happy. So how do we use that medium to exploit some of the wonderful insights offered by this medium? That's something that we are exploring. So this document, in a way, also makes us feel responsible that even if we are doing an online event, how do we make these important insights available to people, audiences who are watching it online? So this is something that we would like to do. Thank you.
No, thank you, Vijay. I have points of view, which I'm sure others will as well, in terms of venues and whether you implement or not. It'll be fun to discuss that a little later. What I would love to do is now to ask Swati and Venkatesh to do a similar introduction and point of view and what they've been doing. It'll be interesting to hear, because with the medium of, the participants being children, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. So a quick recap about what Bookaroo has been doing. This would have been our 13th year of running the festival. We have had 37 editions in 16 cities across India and 1 overseas. So as you just mentioned, and most people know, that it is a literature festival for children from 4 to 16 years. So actually the primary consumer or the primary attendee is a child. So therefore you can visualize, what this pandemic has done to the core nature of the festival itself. We have been through the EEMA guidelines, and first of all, congratulations. It's a wonderful document that you prepared for all of us. But some of the things that are peculiar to Bookaroo, we need to mention. For instance, we don't have registrations because it's a non-ticketed event. So what we have is that children come on their own, which means we send out our, promotions and information out, and then people who are part of the mailing list or those who see our promotions, they come with their families. And a lot of times families mean parents, grandparents. And one of the things that is there in the generic preventive measures is that below 10 and above 60 is kind of a vulnerable group, and we shouldn't look at that, which means, 70% of our audience in terms of, children goes, because our biggest target, largest number of children attend from the 8 to 10 year age group. Everybody says so. Not just Bookaroo, but every other event that we that happens for children, that seems to be the most, most popular age group that comes to festivals. The other thing is that the festival itself is a 2-day event. So for 2 full days from 10:30 till 5:30, we have chock-a-block events, as in sessions, which are about 100 sessions in 11 venues in Delhi, and in other cities, it is 50 sessions in about 5 to 6 venues over the 2 days. And the number of speakers is between 25 to 30 in smaller cities. When I say smaller, means non-Delhi. And in Delhi, because we are based out of Delhi, we have about, anywhere between 60 to 80 speakers. So then that green room aspect. So I'm going to give you just an overview of the festival. Venkatesh will connect it to the EEMA guidelines and talk about it. The seating arrangements that you spoke about, and just to give you an insight into how it works, is that those 11 venues get populated at the same time, which means almost like at the gong of a bell, children of different age groups enter the different sub-venues. So there will be about 350 children under the Kahani tree. There'll be 50 children at the Crafty Corner, another 50 at the Doodle Wall, then about 150 in the auditorium. So that's how the spread of the festival is, the way the event sessions are held. And then there are these activity sessions. So when we talk about sanitizing and, the surface sanitizing that happens at the gate, etc., that EEMA has proposed, I understand that. But in a festival for children, we have things like paper, pencil, flip charts, and colors, scissors, tape, ribbons. All of that is scattered in various venues because speakers are using that. We are using them as props. We are using them to make creative stuff. So we have to think of that as well. And then, of course, there's the food counter. So there is always a biggish, food counter where we have different stalls, and children kind of use it as a picnic because we have half an hour gaps in between the sessions, and they go and sit there and kind of, have food or just have kind of a, little outing, between sessions. And of course, then there is the large bookstore. So we have a fabulous bookstore because all the books of the speakers are displayed. And that's another place which is fully crowded at the time of the festival. And, to kind of say that we will be able to monitor that, because there is a, it happens in other literature festivals, but for children, they just kind of rush into the bookstore and pick up the books, and then they have to go to the signing area, the book signed. So this is just to give you a kind of a image of what the festival, a typical festival venue looks like at the time of the festival. There's, of course, the pre-production and the back end, the volunteers, the lounge, and all of that is there, the author's lounge and all of that. That's a separate matter, but the front end looks a bit like this. So having given you the image of the festival, Venkatesh will be able to kind of tell you where we are struggling. The guidelines are superb, I must really say, but where are we struggling to see? We haven't, by the way, as Vijay Kumar said, that they are not looking at the physical festival at all. We don't think that way simply because we have to, Bookaroo has been like a growing up thing in the festival for the childhood. So therefore, we cannot sort of, we have done about 75 sessions since May 1 online, but that's not the same as, so we do have a little glimmer of hope saying that we want to do the physical festival. So over to Venkatesh about that.
Having said that, and having read the SOPs, which is brilliantly put together, we are actually solely tempted to think, okay, we started off with zero base, we don't know whether we're going to do this or not, but having read the SOPs, we feel we should, why not give it a try, But like Swati was saying, it's children, okay, it's children, and it's going by a generic preventive measure, which can, I think, may change also. The thing is that under 10 and over 65 doesn't matter, because the parents, we can I probably ask them not to be there. But the under 10s is where we need to work on. And each of those SOPs which you're talking about can be done, but like Vijay said, it's the cost which is an important factor here. But I think time-wise, if one plans it, it can be done. But having said that, we're still not sure. But this gives us a little, and we want to do it kind of feeling, if you know what I mean. And coming to like one or two SOPs which we talk about here, the sanitization, the fact that getting children to wash their hands every 60 minutes, one important thing which need to control. You talk about the washrooms, the bathrooms which need to be clean, but being in India, being in the kind of situation we are in, one might find it very, very, very difficult to get that done. It's not impossible, but it is possible, but it is very, very difficult to do. So a lot of peculiarities are because we are a children's festival. If it was an adult festival, we would say, okay, we can explain to the adults what to do, how to do, and they'll probably listen. It's not the children don't listen, but having the natural exuberance which children have, it's a little difficult to force them or control them, which we don't like to do in any case, because the festival itself is an expression of the children's natural self.
And one thing that I know there's only 1 minute, and just wanted to add that there is another robust part of the festival, which is outreach, where we could reach out to children who cannot normally come to a festival. So we go to them, which means we might be going to care homes, to hospitals, to slums, to underserved schools, to special needs schools. So that, to my mind, is also going to get hugely affected by the pandemic. And I don't know how we will be able to coordinate and make sure that all the SOPs will be, we are looking at guidance here, so we are not saying negating it. So we are saying that is also an area of concern for us, because that makes the festival really inclusive, and we feel great that we are able to do this. So yeah, that's about us, all from us.
No, thank you. I can see that there's a lot of, as for all of us, the anxiety is about the people who will be coming and be involved, and how do you keep them safe. But I think also what I think is going to be important for both you, Vijay, and for the two of you, is the fact that you've taken leaps of faith in just starting the festival when you did, and having run it so far. So as Vijay said, how do you find the alternate ways of not exploiting? Because I think every cloud has a silver lining. One of the silver linings I see is the SOP, because it gives us a guideline, pandemic or not. It gives us a structure of what would actually be an ideal space without the extremities. I have been, traveling, looking like a clown. I wear a PPE suit, and I've been on flights to Calcutta, to Jodhpur, to Bombay. I've even stayed a few days in some of these places. And I realized, having done those, that there is a confidence that if you start keeping these aspects in mind, because I think what a lot of us have had to do, and I've had to do over the summer, is actually deprogram and then reprogram. Because when you do something a particular way for X number of years, it's very hard to stop. I'm still struggling with it, but in terms of agility, I think that's the word that Sanjoy had used on one of these talks. And I really like that word, more than adaptable or any of that. Agility into dealing with the situation is what it's about. And right now I have events I have events in November, December, and they're for groups of people of 100, 150, and these are high-end spaces, so it's not 1,000, 1,200, 500, whatever it is. So I'm seeing some of the SOP kick in, because we're having to tangibly deal with it, because it's around the corner. And I'm finding that of interest. And what has helped is also the fact that you've taken on a separate agency that looks at this, because that's not how I'm programmed. And if I start focusing on that, then the actual creative process will be overrun by that. So the point is to do what you can do, using some creativity to keep track of the spacing and all of that, venue especially. In Hyderabad, I've done events in multiple places. And yes, of course, it's just taking a venue that is not normally associated with what you do. I think the super specialty hospital is a great idea. But even the exhibition grounds and so on and so forth, HICC or whatever it's called,
Yeah.
such vast quantities of space there which so few people use, if you look at it in a consistent way, that I'm sure that as and when you choose to engage with it, you will find a way to do it. Because the other thing that's very important, which I find, and I'm so relieved, I see my team, it's been difficult sustaining them through this time, not just economically, but also in terms of keeping your mind going in activity rather than focus on what's for lunch and dinner and are you going to clean up your house or not. And we've gone down to those basics at one point when you're crawling out. But is the human touch? And what we all have in common is that we are in the business of crowds. So how in the business of crowds are you going to find an alternate way to engage? Because even if it's a smaller group, and I've been watching, I can give you an example of a particular family who would normally do an event for 2,000 people. But rather than not do it at all, they've chosen to do it with 200. And so then the conversation about how we're going to let more people know, it's been interesting in terms of the use of technology on venue, not about just Zoom, because in the end, Zoom or Instagram does become the small screen. So that engagement of how that becomes a larger event, but just a small number. When you were talking about the number of speakers, 25, 30, 60, 80, that's huge. But I said, well, if you have 15, 20 at the live event and then the others are coming in, I'm an avid follower of some of these talent shows. And I've watched a couple of them where a couple of the judges are live and a couple of them are large screens with the face of the judge over there. It's quite funny, but it's also realistic. It's the sense of we will get on regardless, drive through regardless in some way or the other. And having to deal with the events coming up now, it's exciting because there's a little bit about the human spirit of which is fairly indomitable to go on regardless. I love the word Zoom fatigue. I'm very Zoom fatigued. So I don't know. I don't know what you think, Vijay, what you think, Swati. Other points of view, why don't you?
I just wanted to add a point here, which you said about the hybrid, live and, on Zoom. So we just for everyone to feel hopeful. I don't know how long, but we resumed our bookstore in the middle of the pandemic on 4th of August. So resumed meaning we reopened our bookstore. We had started our bookstore 6 years ago, and then we started on 4th August. So on 2nd of October, we had a live event inside the bookstore just to test it out. So the author, Paro, was on Zoom, though she wanted to come, but there was some problem at home. So she was on Zoom. The narrator was in the bookstore, and the bookstore is like 750 square feet. So we had 5 children and 5 parents, and then the 2 of us and the narrator. And we had made those circles and all of that EEMA is suggesting. It was a bit comical considering that we usually have, people chock-a-block and, jostling with each other for space. But at least it was a beginning just to see, and also the fact that the creators themselves are also very keen to reach their audience. So in a way, it was like a teamwork, it wasn't the same, but we gave it a shot. So just wanted you to know that can work and that option does exist. And, possibly festivals will have to morph a bit. We certainly have to, I believe that. So.
I can see that in the sparkle in your eye. Possibility.
Yeah, see, one of the things that, that is always, linked is the number of people who attend and the sponsorships.
Yes.
Sponsorships are always linked to footfalls. And so if you say that, okay, I'll have, 10 people attending, right? Or, 100 people attending. As it is, sponsorships are very difficult to get, particularly for literary events. And if, obviously nobody is interested if your event is going to be watched by 100 people or 200 people, right? So that adds to the challenge of, the cost of production, which is going to be exorbitant. And also, as I said, yeah, see, it's very easy to convince authors, artists that they'll be happy with 10 interested people rather than 100 disinterested people. But it would be very difficult to convince somebody who wants to sponsor an event. And honestly, I mean, we are not in a position, at least we don't have the kind of deep pockets to organize an event on our own, right? So we depend entirely on sponsorships, on on government support, because the government, of course, at least to our festival, it does not contribute monetarily, but it does it in kind, extending a venue or giving a few hotel rooms at a discounted price, something like that. But a major part of it comes from private sponsorships.
I was talking last time to when we were doing the trial run, and there are two examples I have which I've seen at close quarters. One is a friend of mine who runs an art gallery in Delhi, and also a magazine and online digital spaces. I was very impressed because through these 6 or 8 or whatever months it was, he kept his entire studio running at his full salary because he found alternate ways, put together stories, small bits of sponsorship which came in to run that event because it became about footfall online.
Yeah.
I don't think that way easily, so I've had to shift my thinking around to understand that better because there is a lot of sponsorship that comes that way. And then I saw it happen again over the last 2-3 weeks in the world of fashion. Because normally the fashion weeks happen, the couture shows happen.
Yeah.
They have managed to do it online, and they were shooting with green screens. And so they did it all with sponsorship, and fashion shows are not easily sponsored. I think they got more sponsorship this time than they normally do, just because if a person has 1 million followers, so then how do you find those influencers who become part of your festival rather than, so then how do you reach more people?
Yeah.
And I think that's a process of deprogramming, reprogramming that I'm doing right now, just to understand how that works. So I don't know what you think about that,
Yeah.
It's worth exploring.
Yeah. But Sumant, I also wanted to ask you, if you're keeping the data of the visitors for 15 days or 2 months or 3 months, are there concerns about privacy? I mean, did anybody say that we are concerned about privacy?
Privacy in which context?
No, for example, I think it was just mentioned, Siddharth mentioned that you keep the data of all the visitors for 2-3 months. So did anybody ask the question about, their everything is, you are keeping it, their address, their physical address, their email address, their phone number. So, I mean, did anybody have concerns about privacy?
See, I was part of the core committee for putting the SOPs together for weddings. So in that context, and I can answer for that space, we can ask Siddharth separately. Not really, because you see the client or the guest or the host would have that information regardless.
Yeah. Okay.
All you're doing is cross-verifying that no one has fallen sick. And the thing is now, if you're traveling for an event, you're going anywhere, you're on that Arogya Setu app anyway.
Yeah.
I have to be on it and updated. At the moment, I'm doing 1 COVID test a week before and after a trip because, if I go visit my parents, I'm concerned that I'm not a carrier in that sense.
Yeah,
and the other thing is it is a chain reaction. And therefore, this process is important because I was having this conversation today about one of the projects. It's an interior project. It's not and the point is, it does matter at every level. The people who come into work, the carpenter, the someone else, because if that passes on to the design team, that passes on to the client, onto the guest, it's just, a catch-22. So I'm very relieved that there are a couple of agencies that have stepped in, who will be there, in fact, for a couple of the things I'm doing, who will be doing the monitoring. As part of the SOP, there is the third-party monitoring agency, which we talked about, which is still in construct because there haven't been any things to monitor, and they are starting now. But the fact that the agencies have stepped in, so it's a task, it's a job, it's a new job, but I'm grateful that job is being done by someone who you hire, and they will, it's like when you have an event and you say fire, security, the doctor, the hospitals, you have to have that backup.
Yeah.
I have a question, like how to make the SOPs watertight, more watertight. Like you're just talking about Arogya Setu. I believe people download Arogya Setu and then don't switch on the Bluetooth. So is it easier to get away by saying they get the green signal to go in and pass through a certain area? How does it? Because in a festival, we can't afford to, whether the Bluetooth is on or not. How do we check these things?
Well, usually you can't even enter if it's not updated, and it's not updated if it's not on. So I can't board a flight until I've shown that. So much as I resisted it earlier, at least there is one protocol right now. This is one of the protocols, which gives me a sense of security at the moment, that there's something. Basically, what are we trying to do? Trying to feel as safe as is possible in the complete uncertainty of what the virus is all about,
So Sumant, my question is that we have raised a few concerns about dealing with children in this scenario. So will you be sort of discussing internally, or should we be?
Why don't you bring that up? That's your area of expertise. I mean, I've worked with children's theatre, I've done children's workshops, so I understand what you meant by the ebullient nature of, there's no to talk about physical distancing is almost next to impossible.
Which is why schools are not opening, probably, because that's the last thing that will open. Sorry, I interrupted. Yeah.
No, I'm just following up on what you're saying. One of the things I've been thinking about, and that Vijay also in terms of, advertising, I keep looking at the horrible PPE suits we all have to wear. And I'm just thinking it's such a great surface for any kind of signage and color. It's all white, gray, dirty. And the moment you move into that zone, it becomes easier, because I think with children, it has to become something that's fun. So how do you protect them the most? That's the game rather than torture, because one of the PPE suits was made of the material which you make awnings with. It's like tarpaulin. I felt I'd fall sick just wearing it, because you reach the other end soaked. You're a wet mass blob inside.
Another thing is, I'm not only talking about the negative thing. This is again a negative one, is the fact that you're supposed to wear the mask at all times whenever you're in a event like that. But in our case, in the Bookaroo case, event started 11 in the morning and goes on to 5:30 in Delhi at least. And people are there for at least 5 to 6 hours on an average, because that's how the sessions are planned, so that every age group has some session happening through the day. Now, how does one get children to wear a mask continuously for so many hours? I mean, these are like
practical.
When you think about it, it's seems
we are struggling with these thoughts actually.
No, I think it's a rather bigger shift that will have to be looked at, because I absolutely understand those are not practical, feasible things. And one of the things being tested on SOPs, like you said, food, and I realized some people haven't got their head around to thinking another way. So there's still lengths of that, and then how do you protect people from chefs? So likewise with children, I think it'll need to be the older children who'll understand this at least to keep the idea of it alive, because I suspect this will go on for a year or two. I'm just thinking aloud, because either you shut shop completely, or you find a halfway measure where it's accessible but still alive, and I think that's the hard decision that many of us have had to take. I think it's been, and none of us have escaped these hard decisions. Do you shut shop or do you continue? And then how do you find a halfway measure to continue? And then look at what you learn in the process as the silver lining and something to look forward to.
Yeah, if I can, Venkatesh, I must tell you that our festival is about 11 hours a day. It's a 3-day event, 11 hours a day, 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning to cultivate, ends with a cultural program at 9 o'clock in the evening.
Yes.
So forget about children, even for, grown-ups, it's impossible. But, I was just thinking, both Swati and Venkatesh, that if you have something like, let's say for every 20 children, if you have some kind of a monitor, you can choose one of them and make that person one of the children, and maybe you say, okay, now you will be responsible for these 10, 15 people. So, like your class monitor system, maybe that might work, because they feel kind of empowered to at least. So if we, the Chinese technique of breaking a problem into smaller parts. So since we can't manage, 300 to 400 children, probably, have a group of 20 and then say, okay, now you will be, the kind of leader, give them some nice title. And I'm sure some management guy will suggest a wonderful, very, title, and you can give them chief executive officer or whatever. And then, and maybe the children can, help you overcome that issue.
I mean, the other thing that I'm just seeing happening is when there are, say, in a social event, 5 sequential events, what they're doing, or they still want 500 people there. They're separating it. So for each one, there's 100. So instead of 500 coming for all of them, they're finding a way to break it up so that there's smaller but separate people, so there's participation. And the other idea that's coming up is we are working with an interactive, VR, AR team to understand that if there are multiple screens, one person per screen, and then there's smaller people here, then that kind of interaction is quite a cool, it becomes a game, for children, especially who are used to gaming so much on their PlayStations and Xboxes, and whether they have it at home or not, or whether it's at school, it becomes aspirational. So I think any festival in a sense is aspirational in terms of either information or access to a speaker or a writer, so I think shifting your head around to see what is the next, the alternate way to achieve the same intent, I suppose. I don't know if that helps, but.
No, yeah, absolutely. Re-engineering needs to be done to figure out, how the same impact, the impact won't be the same, because one of the, like he said about his motto, our motto has been to break down those walls and, freedom, free to choose, do what you feel like doing, move from one venue to the other if you, please, choose your program and all of that. But yeah, we'll probably need to really think through.
I think we can't work with the old wiring at all. We need an entire rewiring.
Yes, reprogramming, rewiring.
Yeah.
But this is a good time to think of any last couple of things that you have in mind, because I can see Rashmi pop up on screen, so which means it's time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fine.
That's about we think about these things more seriously.
I find that each time we talk about it, something new comes up, and it's a little step and a little step at a time. So one pushes on. So no, thank you very much. That was great, and congratulations on having sustained through it all. Now it's just building up again. I think we went into the trough, and now it's doing the slow crawl out of that well. So Rashmi, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sumant. Thanks, Swati, Venkatesh, Vijay, Kumar. I think it was really helpful to get a sense from you as to how you've been doing your work over the last few months and what your concerns are. And what obviously seems to be very clear is the sheer reluctance of taking anything physical for 2 reasons. One, as you mentioned, is just the sheer overwhelmingness of the situation. So while the SOPs help, the budgets and the structures with which you work may not necessarily allow that. So that seems to be very clear. But on the other hand, as what I'm really happy to take away as a key outcome of what your discussions are, is that the re-engineering absolutely must happen. So you can't run it the way you are. So there will be perhaps some element of nostalgia. Maybe we'll not be able to do 12-hour-long days of a festival for a few more months to come. So what do we have in that place is something for us to think about. And I think it's a perfect segue to bring in our second set of speakers in. So I'd like to invite Gunjan Arya from OML. She's our chair for the next session, and the speakers for the next session are Tanush Joseph of 70 EMG. He's the co-founder and director, and Vanessa Maria Mirza, who's the festival director of Dance Bridges Festival. So Tanush is also one of the key festivals that Tanush looks at, is also the Kala Gho Dance Festival. So the focus here for our session is performing arts. Over to you, Gunjan. Gunjan, you're on mute. We are unable to hear you.
Thank you. I think those are the most spoken words across all Zoom calls, whether it's work, family, or then these seminars. Hey, you're on mute. Sorry about that. Thank you for having all of us here. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing from both Tanush and Vanessa, because they have some very specific experiences. I know from SOP's point of view, what we've tried to do is, yes, make them more specific to our universe, compared to what the government puts out as guidelines. But at the same time, I know that they're not completely holistic. So I'm going to throw it open to them. Tanush, if you could go first, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Gunjan. Great to be here. I have been actually following the Artex and British Council sessions since April. It's been a great comfort to a lot of us to know that there are a lot of people who are in the same boat, and we need to handle this together. So thanks. I think this is a good platform for us to share all our learnings and troubles and find some solutions, hopefully. The protocol that we saw from EEMA is also impressive. It's a lot of work, of course, but like people were saying, it is very, very difficult to follow to the letter of it. Although we understand the spirit is that the industry must have a really watertight protocol in order to give confidence as well as keep the industry afloat. Because if something bad happens, then the whole industry suffers. So in the interest of keeping the little work that's coming in afloat, I think it's imperative that we find a workable SOP. And for that, I'm thankful. So I have a little presentation so that I will just share whatever's on that. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I represent 70. We have a few festivals that we own, proprietary festivals of ours, as well as a corporate division which does event brand launches. We have a digital arm now, which is a reaction mainly to the pandemic and the lockdown. And we have a wedding team. So almost all the verticals that's covered by the SOP is pretty much in our domain. And what we are seeing, I'll start with the bad news, which has already been discussed quite a bit in length. It is also mirroring what I saw on the polls which we got yesterday. The biggest challenges, of course, is that there's no certainty, there's no visual. And back in April, it was the same feedback that we were getting, that we just don't know how long this is lasting. What is the real solution to the end of this? And what can we do in the meanwhile? There's just no way of really saying that. So we have to be really nimble, and we have to find workable methods of taking things forward. The other big challenge is, when I just went out a few days back and saw the kind of mayhem that's on the roads, no masks, no social distancing, and it's really sad to see that there's no behavioral change, or probably it's the pandemic fatigue. And a fear of a third wave is real. And if that happens, then all the good work that's been done is just going to get rolled back. I really hope that does not happen. A big factor that we have to deal with now is the low confidence. Now, the watertight SOPs notwithstanding, there's a lot of fear amongst guests as well as big brands. So we've been trying to talk to a lot of big brands like, say, Hero or Tata Motors, Jaguar Land Rover, who are all regular clients, and we've given them all the protocols that we were going to take. A lot of it are already in the EEMA SOP, but there's this real fear that if something goes wrong, and there's every chance that something can go wrong, there's just no way that any company, anyone amongst us can really say, bang here, I can guarantee that there will be no cases. It's just not possible. We have not reached that stage. So that's another a big factor. Another issue is the lack of commercial general liability, CGL. Although we can insure our own people, our manpower, our suppliers' manpower, there is no public liability insurance of, if somebody falls sick, then what are the liabilities? There's no limitation to that. So that's a cause of worry. And add to that vague regulations. We just don't know what the government regulations are in different states. Every state has a different protocol. And it's so difficult to compile, and it keeps changing. There's also things like IPRS we have to deal with for ticketed events. So that's even another issue we have to surpass, paying even if it's a payment of say 25,000, when we are dealing with these kind of numbers, it really adds to the cost. So that also is a problem. And we're moving on to how we've been impacted. Again, like Vijay Kumar was saying, the sponsorship these days is very, very difficult to come by. We've been in the market for all our festivals, especially India Bike Week, which is in its 7th year. It's tough. There are certain brands with an embargo that they will not sponsor till next June. That's an embargo worldwide in the whole company. There's also in-person events and travel bans in companies. And like Vijay was saying again, the low numbers actually affect revenue. So unless we figure a way out virtually to get the same numbers, it's going to be very difficult to collect decent monies to run our businesses as well as these events. And the biggest problem with the only solution that we know of, which is running a virtual or a hybrid event, is the intrinsic issues with virtual events, which is, there is no multi-sensory experience. People cannot touch and feel what the brand is trying to say, what the festival is trying to say. It's really difficult to interact and engage. You're not immersive. Of course, we've tried to reduce the gap with a lot of solutions. I'll talk about it in a bit. But it's there are some serious lacunae there. So we're trying to address that. We're trying to address the fact that you're just looking at things from the outside like a window and not part of that. Now, our comments on the SOP, I think, again, it's been discussed. Just to make it a little more humane, a few things that we have put into place at 70, both in the office as well as the events we have done in the recent past. And we'll probably follow that because it's worked for us. We were part of the Lakme Fashion Week team who produced it. So they did this wonderful thing where everyone of the team was in the hotel 4 days before, quarantined. And even things like the mask protocol and the PPE protocol had been reworked quite a bit. So for example, wearing masks, it is quite inhuman to tell somebody to wear a mask for 11 hours and 12 hours. So what we're doing is we tell people go and take a break every 45 minutes, every hour. If need be, change your mask. We can give you as many masks as you need. Take a breathing break. Take one of those exercise breaks where you go out and there are loads of yoga, breathing exercises that you can do, which will get some oxygen back into your system. That's really important. The other few are actually things that we should have been doing anyway, regardless of the pandemic. Things like following shifts, giving your team and your suppliers team a really good diet. I wouldn't rule out giving them kada tea, a proper healthy diet. So we've reworked our crew food. The protocols, of course, have changed with the pandemic. We're doing mostly pre-packaged food or, just live counters because that's actually the safest. So those are a few things that we have done to make it easier. And I have to also add that in the beginning of the pandemic, sometime in April, the first thing that we did was actually reach out to our suppliers as well, because we are only half the game. The rest of it is done by our vendors, and we've kind of chosen those people who we felt would appreciate and are sensitive of the requirements, and we've actually put them through these training sessions ourselves, taken the trouble so that we feel confident. And there are, of course, some binding legal agreements as well to ensure that they do follow it to the letter on these things. So what is our snapshot? We are limiting numbers. That's the only solution. So we have reworked some of our festivals to work around this. So, for example, India Bike Week has close to 10,000 people on the ground in Goa, and it's a big party. We just simply cannot have that. So we've reworked our format to have smaller shows but larger numbers. So we have events where there are 150, 200 people with social distancing, and where there is only one event which can take 50 people at a time. And we're trying to stick to outdoor venues, which is a lot more safer to do. And of course, all the other protocols are being taken. The other thing is the strict implementation by COVID marshals. Like the EEMA has done, we also did some work initially back in April, speaking to microbiologists to understand what their take on this whole thing is, how dangerous all this is. And we call them COVID marshals. So just like fire marshals, Sumant was mentioning, we have these marshals now. We have some really good suppliers, partners. For example, Momentum, who takes care of everything to do with hygiene. And they just come in as a third party. They just do only this thing to ensure that it's implemented as strictly as is physically possible. A few other important things. One is no raw food at all, and no cold food. We prefer live counters and possibly prepacked food. Simplifying the navigation and reducing roadblocks, registration lines, clear signage. These are a few basic things that we do. Also, we prefer do-it-yourself, where we allow people to do most of the things like get your own food, even if it's cleaning up after yourself, say toilet. These are things we prefer. And if there is a frontline exposure that's required, then we keep that to a very minimum. And the quarantine pre-event is also something we are really serious about doing. And lastly, get all your employees insured, medical insurance, so that even if they fall sick, we are taking care of them properly. In terms of hope, there is a lot of silver lining around this. Tech has really come up, and this whole thing is possible thanks to Zoom. A lot of us didn't know how effective this was. We never used it to our advantage, and now we are all doing meetings which we would have had to travel so long just to get to one meeting and attend things like this. But now, sitting from home, it's all possible. There's been some brilliant advances in green screen technology, motion sensing cameras, and zero density software, Unreal. So using all that is quite exciting, and learning all about that is also quite exciting. We've been working and borrowing from filmmaking and from e-commerce to bridge the gap between in-person events as well as and virtual events. The closer we get to in-person on the virtual platform, which is what we call a hybrid event, the better it is. So our endeavors have been to try to bridge that gap and try and make it as immersive and as engaging as we could. So, for example, trying to send to individual people who have registered as guests on a virtual event, we're sending them food, we're sending them a merchandise kit, so they feel like this is part of that whole experience, although they can't be at the event. We are also hopeful that something like strip testing will be available, which makes it really easy for us to identify at the gate itself if somebody is infected or not. And that gives probably the hope that we can do events without masks at some point, if you're doing the protocols. If everyone's tested negative, then maybe, so really looking forward to that. Vaccine is really far away. So our bets are on therapeutics, and there's been some good advance in that area. Been reading about things like interferon molecule therapy, where it reduces the potential of an infection going into your lungs, and it's it'll become like any other flu. So we're really hopeful that something like that will come through in the next few months. And lastly, I think the biggest change that we could hope for is behavioral change. If people actually follow these protocols, then we know that scientifically it's proven that it's pretty difficult to get the disease if you're wearing a mask and you're doing social distancing. So there is some hope left. In terms of finger falls, I mean, the virtual events definitely is the short-term solution. versus footfalls, on-ground in-person events. And we try and make that work to the best of what we can using technology. And what we have to do is experiment with different formats, experiment with hybrid versions, experiment with real-time compositing, so that it all looks as real as we can possibly make it. We should definitely leverage the lack of boundaries. Now, we are here talking with people who are from so many different cities. We can have people from anywhere in the world coming and being part of our events. So let's try and leverage those positive elements of this lockdown and the technology. And lastly, but the most important thing is alliances, working with each other, trying to support each other with more number of visitors, alliances for content sharing. For Kalagoda especially, we do something called this Kalagoda Arts Festival, and we've been doing it for the last 17 to 18 years, since 2003. And it's a big dilemma for us to first decide that whether we should do it in person, maybe a small part of it in person, and do the rest virtually, or whether we should just do a pure virtual event. We're still in two minds, but most likely it's looking like it's going to be a virtual event. But we would love to look at how, say, a Bookaroo festival can bring in children's literature into Kalagoda Arts Festival, and vice versa. Like if we can share some content there, can we share our followers and encourage people to go and watch your festival, and thereby bring up the numbers to some sort of a level where sponsors then find it attractive enough to put some money behind it. The good thing is there is cost saving here. Costs are falling every day that we are talking to vendors. There are various ways to do this cheaper every day. So that's encouraging as well. I think that's about it from me, Gunjan.
Thanks, Dhanush. That was a really great holistic overview of all aspects, starting from how the industry as a whole is feeling, so that insider's perspective, as well as some of the recommendations and suggestions that you've had to share. If I can ask Vanessa to go next, it would be great to hear from you as well.
It's great to be here, and it's been wonderful to hear everybody's points of view and suggestions and things like that. Just to give a brief outline, Dance Bridges Festival is an international dance biennale in Kolkata, so it happens every 2 years. Ideally, we would have had our next edition in August, so we have a large number of international artists coming into the city, and also dancers and artists from different parts of India and South Asia. We develop a number of events with residencies, workshops, films, things like this, jam sessions. And it does look like for the next edition, we'd have to keep it largely digital, but maybe a hybrid format of some kind might be possible depending on the situation. I'll just quickly go over the SOPs from the point of view of a dance festival, and probably this relates to theater as well. One main issue for us is, like I mentioned, we work with international artists. So it seems like the situation is still quite volatile. There's still quite a long, quarantine period. And so that would be quite a major change in our programming. We can definitely still work with local and national artists, but then this would probably affect sponsors and also the kind of branding that we have worked with. So that's one big shift and challenge to navigate. The second would be actually quite intrinsic to the form of contemporary dance, because without physical touch, it's quite rare to actually see a performance. Nowadays, it might not be a lot of it, but there's always contact or at least proximity. So unless it's programming just, solos or very specially adapted performances that, can maintain a sufficient amount of the social distancing norms, that's definitely going to be quite difficult. Coming into the production part of it, I think it's really wonderful. The document given by EEMA has very explicit guidelines, which I really value, but I feel like the implementation of it with staff that we've worked with, or with suppliers that we've worked with, it might actually be quite tricky. It needs a lot more time involved, and it needs quite a lot of supervision. So part of it was like with literary festivals and things where you've got pretty packed schedule. You need to then rethink how many events can you actually have. Maybe production has to be before, a day before, set up, tear down. It's all going to take much more time. And for us working with international artists again, or trying to maintain the standard of the festival so that things happen on time, the scheduling is quite a critical area. The other area would be working with venues and trying to bring in audiences. So again, like many of you said, we want to be as inclusive as possible, but given the current restrictions, that's another challenge. And so I don't know, I think outdoor venues definitely has many, many benefits, but in some ways it's easier to regulate things for indoor venues. And particularly if we are working in August with the weather here, probably an indoor venue would be our preference, even if it's smaller numbers. So that would mean programming repeat shows, having more shows, or even trying to see that shows are connected quite close, so people can attend one performance and there's a gap and they attend another performance, and so you swap audiences. But I do know from the state guidelines and even some of the center guidelines, they have mentioned some rules for the time overlap not being too close. And some of the venues that we've worked with, so there are a lot of venues that we probably can't work with given these guidelines and given the situation with COVID, but a venue like Kolkata Center for Creativity, or we worked in the foyer of the IMI College. So they have many levels from which you could view a performance. Even actually Quest Mall, where we had a public performance. So that could be a way, I mean, maybe if you wanted to think of it, if audiences can view from multiple levels, you could actually have physical distancing and still a reasonably larger number of people, perhaps. And the last area would be, again, with budgets and collaboration. I mean, I think we just can't ignore the fact that costs are going to be affected by this. But at the same time, I feel it's something we need to approach positively and just take in our stride. I do think that we may not be able to have a dream event of, just the full scale, full force of what we've been doing and that's been talked about, but I do feel the value in something smaller. If we can pull it off. Of course, it still needs to meet certain criteria and still be feasible on, different grounds. But I do think that's probably the way forward, at least for us, would be to try and do smaller standalone events even, or just structure a festival on a smaller scale and ensure that, we can follow to a large extent these guidelines and ensure that the safety of the audiences. And I think that's how we would approach it. So, yeah.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think both Vanessa and Tanush have come with a lot of hope. I know for us as part of the events industry, it's always catering to that very human emotion of wanting to be part of a tribe and be part of a community. And that's what physical interaction gets us. But of course, given the new landscape, it's important for us to figure out how to forge those bonds, given the newer technologies we have access to. And Tanush, you touched upon some of them. But some things that have come out, and I think for us also as OML, we're learning from the content side of the business, where we're learning from film productions. Tanush, you mentioned that as well, where sometimes it just works for artists to quarantine together before a shoot, and the entire crew sort of comes together. That for 4 days everyone is safe. And Vanessa, I don't know if that makes sense, because you mentioned that different dancers on stage.
Yes.
And how much
definitely we'd have to make those kind of artist bubbles.
Right, absolutely. But of course, there's no wishing away COVID or wishing away this new landscape that we have to operate in, but learning from different segments and different industries to see how we can adapt. So Tanush, obviously you mentioned e-commerce, you mentioned production, film productions, etc. And those are the models that have been able to evolve and do well during this time. Tanish, one of the things that you mentioned was no COVID CGL, but you also mentioned employee insurance. So something that we've done is actually taken COVID insurance. So there's an additional COVID insurance that we've taken for everybody who's part of our festivals team. So I'm not sure if that helps, but yes, having COVID marshals is a great idea. And this is something that's helping us with our productions as well. So film productions that have started off. The other thing that you mentioned was just overall embargo in terms of companies saying that, hey, this is something that we're not going to participate in. And of course, that's affected us as well across various business lines. So, for example, as OML, I think today we're one of the largest suppliers of content to Amazon Prime Video in the country, but they're under an embargo and they can't start their shoots globally just yet. So we will see the impact of this sort of play out across the board. But I think, again, to your point, if we're able to figure out what those workarounds are, which is have some people jump in virtually, some are just hub and spoke events. So, for example, if you have smaller events happening across the country, I know India Bike Week is that massive congregation of 10,000 petrol heads in, one massive party. If that doesn't happen, does it make sense to maybe do smaller sessions around the country and then bring that all together virtually? I'm not sure if that's workable. Of course, every client has their own requirements, but it would be great to, I think for us at least, the SOPs was a push to say, hey, if we can start in these current circumstances, what are the guidelines we need to ensure that everyone is safe? Of course, building on top of that, all the ideas that you had, Tanish, in terms of making them humane, making them workable, making them adapt to even the overall temperament for fans and audiences that are coming out. All of that still is our work. And this is our work as event organizers, festival owners, owners of IPs and ideas that work for our community. But yes, thank you so much for your thoughts. If there's anything more specific you'd like me to address, I'd love to take that now.
Not really, but I'm wondering, are there any questions from the participants?
I think there have been questions in the Q&A box, but our wonderful panel has been very diligently answering them. But we can bring one up for everyone, because this seems to be a big concern. And actually, it's also lead into the next session that we're planning, which we'll share about in a short while. But Akshat Sinha asks, access and resources become prime to actually implement the SOPs. They're required to be safe, but does it increase expense and non-inclusivity like outreach, justify even conducting a festival? So, I mean, we can have an entire session on resources, but I thought it might be useful to sort of think about, Vanessa, as you were saying as well, that the value of doing something smaller and intimate at this stage. So perhaps one way to sort of, reframe a little bit of that question and also answer Akshat is, what is the value of doing smaller intimate sessions, and can that value be communicated to all your stakeholders, be it audiences, your teams and sponsors? Would that, if that would work as a question?
I wanted to just give an example, because I think in India we're so used to large numbers, and that's also the way that sponsorship rise. And I was during the secondment in Germany, there was a performance and there were just 20 people, and that's how it was, and they had multiple runs of it, but it was just 20 people. And even the last time, our theme was like intimacy, the sense of intimacy. And I feel this is probably less explored. Of course, it's a different, model to then work out economically, but, there is a value, at least for me, I would feel. Yeah.
I think I'm quite excited about doing intimate 150 people events, but of course the numbers have to work. So you do smaller numbers but larger number of events, so overall you get a decent number, and try and personalize those experiences as much as you can. And India being such a diverse country, every corner has a different culture and preference. So maybe this is the silver lining, that we could customize and personalize, make each event bespoke. Possibly that's the silver lining here.
Absolutely. And Tanush, I think you mentioned something about sending merchandise kits home to fans that are attending virtually. So actually building in that hybrid model of, hey, here is a virtual experience, but it comes with that added physical touch of us having, thought about sending you something home.
Yeah, we've just actually done a few events on that basis, not festivals, but for a corporate event, and it worked brilliantly. It's still not there; it's not in person, but yeah, okay, it's the closest we can get.
True. I think for us, at least with the Bacardi and 87 Weekender, with a music festival at that size, we're obviously missing that visceral experience of, being next to somebody or enjoying the same music with. But we're obviously taking a leaf out of that same book as well in sending Weekender kits home to people. At least there's a little bit of that happiness that we can deliver along with the programming. Of course, the programming remains what it is, which is you get a chance to see it on a screen. But are there other things that maybe we can layer in? So one of the things that maybe we're thinking about is having artists actually hang out with fans online while watching, streamed content. So how is it that you add in more layers and it's no longer just about watching an event like you would watch television programming? So how do you bring in more interactivity? I think those are the few tools that maybe we can turn to, various technology partners for. And that's what we're looking at building in.
Yeah. I was on a panel a few days back with Atul from Candid, who's one of the EEMA guys, a good friend of ours. And this is where alliances come into play. He has access to something like 100, 200 cities across the country. So for e-commerce, imagine spreading out with a food packet at 11 o'clock. As soon as your event starts, it can reach there. It's all possible. And alliances with our industry and the fraternity is what it is.
Absolutely. I think this time is just pushing us to collaborate even more with each other so that we can find these solutions and make them workable.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I just wanted to add here, if we can find shared resources when we're in our planning, especially partnering with venues and things, especially when things like, staff and human resource, so try and partner strategically, of course, but also, build on the partnerships that you've had before. I think that could help a lot in your cost plans and budgeting.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think two ideas that I liked, and one of which we are already thinking of is, the one idea was alliances, which I think is very important. And maybe some of us who have in our festivals around the same time may consider changing the dates and do it together. Let's say if we are doing it in January and somebody else is doing it in February, and can we mutually agree to a common date and then do it together? That is one idea that can be. I think that's something that that really appeals to me. And the second is this hanging out with authors or artists. We in HLF, apart from the speaker speaking to, let's say, 600 people, after the session, we choose certain authors who are very popular with the audience, etc., and have a small, intimate, 30, 40 people sitting around with the author. And, we call that Meet the Author.
Yeah.
And, maybe we can bring that into the online format. And apart from, the simple fact is that, for example, people watching on YouTube don't feel as connected as those who are in the Zoom.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a simple fact. So, so there is already that layer of separation. And therefore, maybe to some registered participants, we can bring them into a smaller, Zoom room and, have a kind of an intimate conversation with the author. Maybe that's something that we can kind of bring it into this new medium.
Absolutely. And this is, in fact, something that we've been working on along with the folks at Paytm Insider. So we're actually building a platform from scratch so that we can take the music festival experience online. But once these tools are built, I know that they will be rolling it out to other festivals as well. So it would be great for, maybe I could offer an introduction and they will be able to use those features for other types of festivals as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all of your inputs, Vanessa, Gunjan, Tanush, Vijay Kumar. May I request all the other speakers and facilitators to please come on video so we can just do the wrap up very quickly. I'm just going to distill down whatever we've heard so far over the last hour and a half. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate EEMA again for putting this document together. Siddharth, Gunjan, Sumant, you and your team have done obviously a brilliant job. I think Siddharth's presentation also took us through that very carefully, because one of the issues that we were talking about in our earlier calls was how do you even begin to navigate the SOPs? So thank you for that, Siddharth, because we can put that part of the video up for people to sort of see how to navigate that. And the sense that we got from our speakers here today was also the fact that it's definitely a robust set of guidelines, but the barrier still remains, on the one hand, the sense of like, should we wait for things to get normal, and in the meantime go online? But if it comes to a physical event, the applicability, which deals with both resources as well as stakeholder behavior, whether it's audiences, whether it's sponsors, how do we navigate that? And I feel like today's session gave us some of that to a certain extent. So I would say that one thing that came through very clearly was having a health and safety officer, much like you had a safety officer. Sumant mentioned that is a very important aspect. So not see it as an additional layer, but as an integral part of your team, because health and safety is now a moral responsibility. It's no longer a checkbox. So I think that adds obviously a very clear direction forward for the festivals, that if you have to plan something, this is a non-negotiable, given the times that we live in. The second thing that we also spoke about is, given these constraints, how do we reformat? What are the different ways that we look at that? And that'll perhaps help us let go a little bit of the nostalgia and appreciate nostalgia for nostalgia, but not as a space for regret. We may not be able to have a 10,000 people festival, maybe for a couple of years, and let's work with that. And perhaps use our creativity to rebound and think about what are the different ways we can continue to engage this community. One thing that came from everyone when Vijay Kumar was saying, or Swati and Venkatesh were also saying, that communities wanted to hear from you. So that's already a healthy sign. And how can we navigate and work with that in reformatting the way we are approaching our work? Another thing was, of course, sponsorships. I know that Gunjan answered a question on the Q&A box about how do you look at sponsors. It's actually very similar to one of the sessions we had earlier on revenue models about, I remember one of the brand managers saying in one of the sessions that the world is going to judge you on what you did during COVID-19. And it judges us as festivals, and it judges sponsors as well. So I think to think about it from the perspective that we're all on the same level, we're not on different levels. And I think the sponsors are also as willing to listen, as Tanush was sharing, Sumant has been sharing, that they are opening up to the realities of smaller sessions and the value, therefore the enhanced value you can get out of smaller, more intimate sessions and more bespoke, experiences. But another key thing that I took away from all of this is, no matter what the SOPs are giving you, the human centricity of the SOPs cannot be lost. We cannot expect people to wear masks for 12 hours. So then what is the way around it? And this is where I feel one of the most amazing things that came through was the SOPs is not Bhagavad Gita. I was writing this down. It's a red and blue line book. It allows you to write neatly, but it's not going to give you all the answers of how to run your festival and how is it that you can keep your audiences safe. For that, we need to create our own devices, but with the expectation of reformatting, thinking about how sponsors and partners are actually partners. They're not someone who are going to necessarily resist against your idea to go small. And I think finally, just bringing your creativity into problem solving, which is what we're all good at, running creative projects and events and organizations, is, as Vanessa was saying, one example is resource sharing and collaboration. How can we look at different ways of building our work within the constraints that we find ourselves in, and also borrowing from the learnings of other sectors, like the film sector, as Gunjan mentioned. So with that, I think alliances become a very important takeaway for us. I know in one of the earlier conversations with Siddharth, he'd mentioned that this is actually the perfect time for us to ask you as a sector to form your own independent committees and plug into the work that EEMA has been doing. So we also invite you to see if you'd like to sort of form a sort of formal informal festivals committee that we could, at the British Council, I'm speaking for Jonathan, but I see him nodding, at British Council and us at Festival Connections, working with you to create a better way of thinking through some of these SOPs. That could be another way forward. And finally, to close it, that actually our next edition of Festival Connections is going to be looking at sponsorships and the way brand leads are thinking about sponsorships and experiences right now. So it's actually the perfect segue into that. So with that, I'd just like to sort of say a big thank you to all of you, all our speakers, all our chairs today, and EEMA for sharing your insights and inputs and doing so generously for all of us and everybody else who is listening. I'd also like to share, offer a big thanks to the British Council and the Artex teams who've been managing behind the scenes and also on the screens. Thank you to Team Access for interpreting all of this for us, and our language interpreters, the Hindi language interpreters, as well as the Tamil language interpreters, for making this session accessible to you. For the last 2 sessions, we've been creating graphic scribes, illustrations of this session. So we've got Sharda Kevkar who will be doing that. For some of you who are not on Zoom and you would like those scribes, please share your email IDs with us, write to us, and we'll be able to share that with you. And I think with that, we are on time to wrap up our session. Please write to us at info@art-x.co, and please let us know if you require anything else. Thank you, everyone. And we shall applause in the sign language way.
Yes.
Thank you.